Yo, dude, how you doing? Um, I'll have to sort of show. I'm going to try to prioritize showing you the fretboard over my mug, but I'll just go through some pentatonic stuff for you real quick here. Well, maybe not real quick, but we'll go. We'll see how long it takes. Um, I'll do everything basically out of like E because E's easy and very guitarish. You were asking about like bluesy pentatonic-y kind of stuff, and I kind of remember our lessons back in the day, and you're right, like it's probably not wasn't something we would prioritize back in those days, but yeah, I mean, obviously guitarists in general kind of just will always revert to this kind of stuff at some point in their lives, and it certainly ain't a bad thing to know. So yeah, the major minor thing in particular is always a weird gray area. Um, but if you take like a groove that's just based out of an E major chord, we'll say, right? So the great thing about pentatonics is you get a lot of flexibility because they don't really fill a lot of gaps in. They're very I mean, it's only 5 notes, right? So as a result, what you end up doing is eluding a lot of the chord tones that are exist in something. And it actually becomes an advantage because you're not really clashing with anything that's underneath your guitar playing, like your lead guitar playing. And the pentatonics are great for that. You start doing like diatonic scales, you're adding a couple extra pitches in there, and those pitches can kind of make you live or die depending on how well you negotiate them over top of a chord progression. But pentatonics and blues scales, you kind of take a couple of pieces out of the picture there, and it actually ends up helping you in some ways. So if I'm playing that E groove, right? The thing everybody does when they first learn the pentatonic scales is even when it's an E major groove, they'll stick with it. They'll stick with it in minor, right? Like in other words, I'll play that 12th fret licks. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. It's weird. We for decades and decades now we've been hearing music where that actually does that. That kind of lets you do a minor-y pentatonic-y vibe over top of a major chord like that. There's nothing really wrong with it. Theoretically, it doesn't make any sense, but for whatever reasons, our ears kind of work that way now. After like a few generations of listening to various styles of music do it for whatever reason, we've acclimated ourselves to it. It would have been like 150 years ago, that would have been like sacrilegious. Everybody would have run out of the place with their hands to their ears. But now we just kind of accept it. But the mistake a lot of guys make is that they'll stick with that at all times. Like it'll just be the minor. But then, you start getting into the slicker stuff where you're kind of doing some major stuff over top of it. And in this case, like if I'm still sticking with that E major background, I'm going to play the same kind of scale formation, just 3 frets back, because that gives me the relative major. So now I'm getting into stuff that sounds like this. Now, the advantage here is that you're actually in key, like in a traditional sense of the word. I'm playing an E major chord and I'm playing E major scale tones. So that's one real nice thing about this is you kind of get that vibe. Plus, it's very easy to get in almost like a country western feel with some of this stuff. Doesn't mean you have to have that sound. It just means that it's sort of it follows neatly from doing this kind of thing. So the big thing though is like a lot of the kind of like you can't let your fingers do the walking too much because the way that your licks resolve in minor are often different from the way that they're going to resolve in major. So, like the same finger patterns sometimes won't quite have the same effect in major as they will in minor. You just got to be careful where you end stuff. Okay, trying to figure out the best way I can describe it. Like if I do certain licks in here, and I just let my fingers just walk in, and then just figure, oh, they're going to work here 3 frets later. Sometimes they don't. You have to kind of play around with it and let your ear be your guide. But you mean think about it. Think about where your resolution pitches are. Your pitch. When you're playing here in minor, your pitches are, root fifth, right? So a lot of your licks are going to end with, right? Now you try to do that same lick in major. Doesn't quite have the same vibe. I just did the same finger pattern. I just did it in major, but because that lick ends kind of like with that C sharp tone there, it doesn't quite have the same effect. So that kind of lick here, I convert it to major. I mean, to each his own. I mean, it depends on how your ears hear of things resolving. But to me, that last majory kind of version of the same lick just doesn't quite resolve the same way as this does. This is very definitive. So you get that kind of vibe going on. Like, a lot of it's just listening to stuff that actually does this kind of stuff a lot. If you want to get all hippied out, because this is definitely where this is going to get this is definitely the direction things are going to go, is definitely like in the hippie music, some old school blues and hippie music. But like one of the classic examples I can think of, if you ever like in your travels want to like YouTube this, is the Allman Brothers do a version of a song called the Statesboro Blues, and it's all in D. It's like a D blues. That kind of groove, like really like old school, very like Texas swingy kind of blues kind of stuff. But the one guitar solo in it in particular, like there's a slide guitar part, but then there's like a more non-slide, just straight up licks guitar solo in there. And the straight up licks guitar solo starts with him doing majory kind of licks over, and then he kind of breaks it up nicely, because the first half of his solo is like D major pentatonic, and then the second half of his solo is D minor pentatonic based over the same chord progression. So he's like this. Hold on. My mind is still in E major mode. Then he's like, more minor. So he flips the switch in a nice, almost kind of predictable way, but it's good for the listener if you're trying to pick up on some stuff like this, because he breaks it up nicely. Like the first half of that solo is very D major pentatonic. The second half of the solo is very D minor pentatonic. So that's something to keep in mind too, if you want to have an example. Statesboro Blues, Allman Brothers. Now, here's where it gets tricky. I just played a blues progression. Like, that song is your classic 1-4-5 blues progression. 1, then it goes to G for the 4 chord, back to D, Back to the 4 chord, which is G. And back to the 1. The 5 chord A. G again. Turn around. Now the problem with that is each of those chords has their own sort of gravitational pull. Because of the way the notes are aligned in the 4 chord, in this case the G chord, D minor pentatonic is going to sound a little bit better over the G chord than D major pentatonic will. So whereas with the 1 chord, the D chord, you can kind of get away with both. With G, you're really flirting with dangerous territory if you lean on D major pentatonic too much. So in other words, if I'm playing that G chord, and I try to play some D major licks over top of that, there's going to be some potential for some clash. You really have to let your ear guide you in, because, like, for instance, when I do that bend here on that D major pentatonic lick, that note right there, I'm bending into an F sharp note, and that F sharp note, my lead guitar was trying to play this note, but the chord actually has this note in it. So instead of F sharp, the chord has an F natural. So if you lean a lot on that major scale, you run the risk of hitting those F sharps, and those F sharps sound really bad. They can sound really bad over top of that chord. There's just little things. It's kind of sort of related to my point earlier when I was talking about how certain finger patterns will work in one but not work in the other. They won't have the same effect. It's the same logic, really. Like, certain gold tones over one, you have to really watch what they're doing over the chords, because it gets really hairy. It's like jazz man mentality. So, whereas in D major, I can kind of go. In G, I wouldn't make that full bend. I would actually bend into an F natural. So right there, I'm almost playing those chords. If you can try to put your thinking cap on and just imagine the chords underneath. If I'm doing this right, you can almost imagine the chords that are happening, even though you're not literally hearing them. Like, you can kind of hear, like, I'm playing over a D chord here. Here it is. See what I mean? Like, so it's the difference between F sharps. There's that F natural, and then the F sharp. So I'll express that in my major scale playing here. I'll be like, here it comes. You can almost, in your mind, you can almost fit in the other tones of that G7 chord there. You know you did something different. You know you leaned into a different kind of chord there, and then you come back. And that's, again, jazzman mentality almost. You kind of have to think about tones that are going to situate themselves nicely over the chords you're playing. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind, is that the pentatonics, especially that major pentatonic, will not sell certain chords. You can kind of get away with both major and minor pentatonic over a 1 chord. In other words, I can play this guy over the D major chord or the D7 chord. And I can also play this guy over the D major or D7 chord. Over that 4 chord, the G7 chord, you're really getting into dangerous territory playing the major one. I usually lean on stuff that's very minor oriented over top of the 4 chord. But then over the 5 chord, that A chord that pops up, you can kind of get away with both too. But again, each chord has their little nuances. So some tones are going to work really well over, some tones of the scale are going to work better over the A chord than they will over the D chord, just by I mean, just logic would tell you. I mean, they have different tones in them, so you're gonna have to figure out how to resolve them. And that's one of those things where you just do it by ear. Um, and also listen to a lot of stuff that works this way. Listen to like BB King stuff, man. BB King's nice because his stuff is very vocal. It's not like flying around at 100 miles an hour. So it's really friendly when you're trying to pick up some of these kind of ideas. He's not a gymnast on the fretboard, but I don't mean that pejoratively. Like a lot of his stuff, he just kind of he'll sit. He'll be like, like he'll just do like little almost vocal lines, and it's very naturalistic. And if you're new to this kind of thing, it's nice to pick up because it doesn't become a mystery. Um, One other point I'll make is the idea that, and again, this is getting into more of a jazz man mentality, but when you freely mix major and minor in the same licks, and that is a really crazy idea. I start getting into stuff that sounds like I'll use tones in both scales over certain things. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's like a lick like this. Again, I could kind of picture myself doing this over like a D blues. Um, that right there is me freely mixing major and minor often throughout the same lines. Now, I'm also very careful to make sure that I'm not clashing with any chords underneath it. Because in my head, while I'm playing something like that, I'm hearing like that 12-bar blues pattern. I'm hearing those same three chords. So I'm trying to keep that straight while I'm playing. But at the same time, I am mixing the phrasing. Like, for instance, I'll do this a lot. This is like an old rockabilly music thing. Now there's notes there from major and minor, like these two guys. That's minor all the way. But then these pitches, the E note, in this case the E note and the B note over the D chord, are major pitches. Those are D major scale stuff. So what if you combine that minor third here, that F note, with those E notes and those B notes? You get that. Because if I just lean on the E and the B and the D, you'll hear very majory. But then I add a little spice to it by adding that minor third, that F note here. And that's another thing, I'll bend in between them too. Instead of just fretting them, I'll bend that F note. And again, I'm doing the same thing on the second string there, where I'm playing A, B, and C here. Like you can imagine a that's again a very rockabilly kind of thing. Jeff Beck does a lot of this kind of stuff. I'm a big Jeff Beck guy. Real fast stuff he'll do, like almost like, because he was a big Les Paul fan, and Les Paul used to do this kind of stuff all the time too. Cleaner than I just played it there, but you know what I mean. There's no reason why you can't do that kind of stuff. This is just an example I'm using of in a situation where you freely mix major and minor often in the same lick, and you can kind of get away with that here. And that's these kind of little patterns of like 5 or 6 notes here actually work overall. If you play your cards right rhythmically, you can actually get them to work over all three chords in that D blues progression. You know, like I just went through that. You can the underlying chords were just your 1 4 5 chord, but I kind of made that lick work over top of all the chords there. Um, and that's another thing to keep in mind too. Like, uh, it doesn't have to be Stevie Ray Vaughan all the time. Like, you don't have to do fill in the kitchen everything in the kitchen sink with this kind of stuff. Oftentimes space works. Like, I'll even though I'm trying to play two guitar parts at once essentially when I'm doing that. Like even in a real world context where I'm got a chordal instrument with me, I'll just play licks like that. You know, like I'll just sit there and go, let the band hit, hit. You know, like there's no reason why I got to constantly feel like I got to fill it up. In fact, sometimes it sounds like it doesn't sound great when you fill it up. You know what I mean? You can. It's very easy to overplay this stuff. Sometimes you just want to be simple, and sometimes actually simple works to your advantage, especially if you just do simple but definitive rhythmic patterns. I'm just doing the same couple of notes over and over again. Um, yeah, I mean, this is a good start. I mean, I could get into this more in depth with you maybe on a future video, but that's just some ideas I would throw around as far as just how to deal with pentatonics. This is just, you know, like a first basic thing. Let me know if there's something you want me to elaborate on, maybe in you know our future correspondence. If that works for you. All right, dude. I'll catch up with you later. Hopefully that helps you a little bit. Anyway, man. Take care, bro.